Hello. Well, let's see. Hello and welcome to the CIS and Senteon webinar series, episode, I believe, 58, if my memory serves correct. We've been doing this over a year straight. Still not done covering these settings that CIS tells us to do.
We got Roddy coming in strong for the Triple Crown.
Howdy, yes. Look,
I mean,
nice. a veteran, a legend, a man about town.
Yes, sir.
A real legend always introduces himself. So I believe what you're saying here. There's no room for doubt.
It's just facts. Everyone knows that.
Yeah. Honestly, it's great timing because Saturday Night Live just came back and is officially funny again, I heard. So you should get your green jacket for being back for a third time.
Yes, there we go.
Thank you, Roddy.
There we go.
I think
does Roddy even need? I don't feel like Roddy even needs an introduction.
I feel like I need to say where I work for because I think I switched so much jobs in the last 2 years.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You've been on here 3 times and you've represented a different company every single time.
Roddy,
what can I say? I'm loose and easy sometimes.
Oh God! Oh, okay. All right. So speaking of memes and comments, we are going to show some of Roddy's humor side to kick off today here in a moment.
I thought that was Zach's role. Anyways.
Roddy changes jobs like a millennial, right? Everyone makes fun of us, but it's y'all, right? So, all right, let's kick into it and get serious. Happy to have you back, Roddy. Representing SureWeb this time around, which we'll let you introduce here in a moment. But per the usual housekeeping, let's go ahead and talk about the latest and greatest over at Senteon. So the biggest thing on the housekeeping side, we'll pull up this screen, awesome, is that we are finalists in Pitch It. So we will be presenting on stage, looking to win that prize money so we can just really keep doing these webinars, right? This is why we actually started the company, talk about settings every week. But really excited to get on stage at IT Nation. We do have a booth and we are going to be doing a construction hard hat theme. So very excited about that.
Let's see Tampa, Florida on there, Zach. Let's pause and wish all of our friends in that region safety and well-being. They're in a tough spot right now.
That is very true. I do have friends out there said gas is hard to come by, and that kind of impacted their evacuation plan. So wishing everyone the best out there.
Absolutely. That's no joke.
Yep. All right. And outside of the Pitch It competition, Senteon, again, is a platform to automate the remediation and harden workstations, servers, and browsers to the CIS standards. And if you ever want to watch a replay of any of these episodes, we do embed them straight to our website so you can catch up on the recaps or read about any of the blogs. As a reminder, if you are a first-time listener, you can always click into the login button here, and you can create a freemium account, which is going to give you access to all of those CIS benchmarks and all of the relevant crosswalks that we have added to our system. So you can see here, check mark those in, and you can see which settings are either required or not required based on the CIS change or crosswalking.
So follow the best framework CIS and map it out to all the other stuff as required.
Honestly, I think every framework should take the time to do this. It's unfortunate, but obviously a value prop of CIS that they do take the time to do this. Blows my mind. Crosswalking is practically a full-time job.
It's a lot of work. Well, we have people. It's difficult to do. It's time.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned crosswalking because that was part of my that's what my LinkedIn post today was about that. So
we'll be getting to that here in a moment.
You think Zach missed that? I don't think so.
No, Zach did not miss it.
We will be getting there.
All right. You are talking to a millennial. He saw
the other piece of it that you get with the free offering here for joining the webinar. You can generate some of our free reporting, internal or external assessments. A default Windows box will typically look like this. Again, I preach this every week. Rich does it alongside me. Defaults are bad. The number 2 risk on the Verizon DVR this year is literally default or misconfiguration. So take this more serious. Look at the CIS guidance, and you can see exactly where you sit today. And
look at our guidance, but just read that Verizon data breach report.
Yeah,
it's real.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Trusted source too. They're good people.
Yep. The other piece
really
of
good,
Senteon,
really well put together report. Yeah.
It is. If you're gonna
I
read
actually
one
should
thing,
write about
choose
that or link it into the comments. I haven't done that yet.
Yep.
It's like things get busy. Not all of us have time to post memes every day of the month, but we'll get to that here
Roddy
in a
does.
moment. The other piece of Senteon, again, it's not just assessments, it's not just reporting, it is remediation. So if you want to give the full experience of Senteon, give that a whirl, and you too can have a compliant endpoint at the technical policy level.
Critical.
All right, we excited for the part we were actually waiting for? The memes.
Here we go.
Roddy, as we look at this in the background, talking about these amazing frameworks that you're also mentioning on LinkedIn.
Homer Simpson approved. Did we mention that?
What was that?
Homer Simpson approved. I don't know if you mentioned that.
But what's driving you wanting to post memes every day this month in particular?
So if you haven't seen the extra marketing that all the vendor marketing teams are putting out there, it is cybersecurity awareness month this month. And the whole point of this month is to raise awareness around cybersecurity, keep it top of mind, and to make sure that as security professionals we continue to improve upon the space and the profession as a whole. So when we were discussing internally at SureWeb, sort of like what did I want to do? We were looking at the traditional thing, like we're gonna be putting some videos out. I did some what we call like TikTok shorts videos of like best practices and things like that. I was like, I'm gonna do something a little bit different. I'm just gonna meme my way through cybersecurity awareness month because it's eye-catching, it's funny, but it also drives a point, right? So the one today, for instance, some are hit or miss, right? Like
the one today is fabulous. But Roddy, I gotta ask, are you working? I know every enterprise loves working with their marketing department. You getting all this, reviewed, approved, or is this just Roddy gone wild?
Why do you think he changed his job so much?
There's a few phrases. Pretty much, there's a lot of HR violations going on. But no, I'm a big fan of ask for forgiveness instead of beg for permission. So we're gonna keep going until I get a call from my supervisor and HR and say, let's talk about your LinkedIn.
I've gotten those calls. Can confirm.
Yeah. So this week on LinkedIn is obviously Simpsons meme. So I've got some lined up in the barrel regarding around Simpsons. So like today was the one about I see too many times IT departments and MSPs. I'm not going to pick on any other professions, but like in general, they'll say we're going to adopt a cybersecurity framework, and they get like the first 30, 40, 50% done, like the low hanging fruit, and then it starts getting difficult. They go, let's jump to the next one, and then they halfway implement it, and then you have this convoluted cybersecurity.
Let's just do something else because this is horrible.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Or and they don't realize that, like, especially CIS controls, it's iterative. So like each year or whatever your review cycle looks like, you need to go and say, how am I meeting the requirements of this control, and how can I improve upon it? So it's just doing that. It's a lot of work, and I feel like we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot.
Though. I mean, there's MSPs and good people like you, Roddy, that actually do that work.
And I would argue that by doing that, you're actually adding more risk into the environment than you're reducing. I would make that argument for most.
What do you mean
for that situation?
Oh, if you're trying
to implement multiple frameworks and you're halfway going through all of them, your governance is going to become so complex over it that you're not going to be able to address risks appropriately.
Okay, I think. Cool. I got you. I didn't follow you for a second.
Yeah. And the thing that people don't realize, and you got to compliment you here, Roddy, is these memes, although they make us laugh, and they're all very relatable. I mean, I myself have been rickrolled when I call partners sometimes. But this does take, that technical understanding to be able to create something like this, right? So it's bringing good awareness, it's keeping things top of mind, and it's definitely a good service to Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So,
and I'll add, these are all homegrown memes. I hand stitched all of them.
Nice.
They are well put together, brother.
Multi-talented, Roddy. You never cease to amaze, I gotta say.
Hey, yeah,
so many levels.
Only it's hard being the honorable school board member, right? It's
all right. That was one of the most fun intros. Let's kick into it, Roddy. As you know, most of the audience is already going to know who you are. You are very commonly on the show, but you are with SureWeb now. This is a company I don't know if every MSP has heard of. Do you mind just doing a quick plug for who you're with and what you do there?
Can we throw up Degley's comment though first?
What do you say?
If it's Degley, it's a problem.
All right, Rob. You need to drop that.
Now that that's on the table. So SureWeb is a cloud distribution platform. So we resell Office 365 licensing, SentinelOne, Veeam. I mean, slew of products, right? So we're Port Cloud Marketplace, Port MSP Consulting, Port everything. Like we do professional services, etc. So if you need like project work done, we can help out like migrations, things like that. So we're Canadian based. So we're based out of Sherbrooke, which is right outside, about 2-hour drive from Montreal. Privately owned. Like the Matt and Peter Cesar started the business 20 years ago. They still own it. Cool. Matt and Peter, really great guys to work for. I give them props. My role at SureWeb, I was brought in last year. My job is to be kind of like a cybersecurity evangelist for them. So I preach the good word of cybersecurity. I help our partners in our community grow their cybersecurity practice. It's just part of the like offerings that we have. And I come on, I speak at conferences. I'll be at IT Nation and ASCII. ASCII's in a week and a half in Tampa. We'll see how that.
And you got the presentation
with Milton. Yeah,
you're not just going to show up with a bunch of memes. You are prepped up, and
he brings it. It's not just memes.
You are prepped up, right?
Maybe. I'm a big fan of winging it. So we'll see. But yeah, so my role is just to basically profess the cybersecurity. Or
you got that.
We got better. We like and help everyone, not just SureWeb partners, but the community as a whole.
I know my pitch
you've helped the community so much, Roddy, and you continue to. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
That's why you're legendary for all the community help that you have provided to CIS and many others.
There's a thin line between legendary and infamous, though, and that's the.
You walk the
I try
line
to
well.
walk that line very well.
I love it. I do love your presentation style because it very much is more sincere and off the rails, if it's what we want to call it. But it very much is just whatever kind of comes naturally and is relatable. So kudos on your speaking engagements. Excited to hear you're going to be talking at IT Nation. So I don't know if I'm going to do another Roddy image on my presentation this time around, but I will note it did get me to the finals.
Yeah.
So maybe there was something there.
Yeah, you can post that cease and desist, my attorney.
Generally, more Roddy, the better. I don't know. I go with that.
All right. Absolutely awesome. So
we're off the rails. 15 minutes in, we're off the rails.
We are. Fortunately, we have a whopping only 10 settings to cover, so I am not that nervous on timing today, like some of the episodes. So, but you are coming from the cybersecurity background. You literally are now hired to talk about cybersecurity. You've been an MSP. You've now worked for enterprises, and you even have a school involvement. So you're very familiar with the security postures of K through 12, right? You've seen those struggles, and you've really empathize with those.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how CIS plays into any of those previous roles and how it kind of plays into your life today. And you're here on this show, so you obviously believe in it. Why are you here?
All right, so I'll take you to my journey in the MSP space. So I left working some privatization work with Department of Health and hospitals here in Louisiana, and I was like, I know. I'm gonna work in the IT space again, and went to an MSP, and I was tasked with like, hey, we're gonna build out operational maturity, and our cybersecurity is becoming a growing concern. This is around 2015, and so I was like, yeah, cool, I'll start working on that because I had a background in securing systems with the in the government space, and then doing risk assessments as part of audits when I was at a CPA firm. So like it all flows together. And as we were building out the cybersecurity side of things at the MSP, I was like, I come from a world in the CPA world where like you have a methodology that you follow. Like you have to follow certain rules. There's a framework set up. We follow.
You're not building the road.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, we don't have to. Yeah, we have a way. We know how to build a bridge, right? We don't have to figure out how to build a bridge every single time.
Yeah.
So I started digging, and like at the time there wasn't a whole lot on like what MSP.
What's the time frame here, Roddy?
oh god, two year time
Before
frame
you're
of
born,
work.
Zach. Stop
Yeah,
it.
2014, 2015 was when I started this journey, and then we were doing the same thing most people do. It's like, all right, I know I need an EDR, I know I need a firewall, I know like the general stuff. But I was like, how do I know what I'm doing is correct? Like, somebody tell me. Someone has to be able. There has to be a guide. And then I came across, I knew about NIST. I came across CIS, and I was like, oh man, this seems a lot easier to implement, because like there's implementation groups. So I know where to start. So if it's like, do I need basic hygiene? Do I need advanced hygiene? Do I need next gen, cybersecurity protections? And so I started that, and I said, all right, where's my low hanging fruit? What's the easiest ones to implement en masse? And then we slowly every year would do like iterative updates. So if we added a tool to the stack, it had to meet certain controls. If we could use more settings inside of like our antivirus, our EDR, like a web content filtering, whatever, like, can we add that and meet some controls? Is it a process issue? Is it a people issue? And so that became, so that kind of ebbed and flowed, and that became like our vCISO approach, right?
So you
like
really learned how to
operationalize
cybersecurity out of the gate.
Correct. And like, it wasn't just
That's
throwing darts
always
at the board.
the challenge.
And
I mean, that's the hardest part.
The goal being like, we need to get, we can't protect everything, but can we get the risk down to an acceptable level?
Sure.
And then that started playing into when cyber insurance came out, and there was a lot of requirements around insurance.
Yep.
Like a lot of the insurance requirements, we could map some of those insurance requirements back to CIS controls, and we're like, this is we're going to continue to follow through. And now I see insurance questionnaires asking about, what framework do you follow? Do you follow a framework? And so we've come full circle. And it's I wouldn't say CIS controls are easy by any means, right?
No, it's work.
As we go into the benchmarks,
we're going to be doing the CIS of CIS with individual settings.
And benchmarks are different. We know that.
Yeah.
But any framework is what I really appreciate about the controls, and I think many people, and Roddy, correct me if I'm wrong, is really the implementation group. So it really gives you that laser focus, so you're concentrating on the kind of the biggest fish first, and then working your way down to the smaller fish, and it's really important with limited resources to kind of have that focus.
Roddy, I have one more follow-up, and if we can pull up this slide I just put in the backstage. I did a presentation at CornCon, and one of the things that I did was I wrote out the first 4 CIS controls, 4 being the one we primarily talk about here with secure configuration management.
They're not ordered that way by mistake, right?
They're not ordered that way by mistake, which is a big thing. So the controls 1 through 18 are very much a prioritized list. So in CIS's own framework, most importantly, you need to know your assets. Then you need to know where your data is and protect it. But after that, it's securing those assets and configuring them.
Yep.
So, Roddy, putting you on the spot, being an MSP, being in the industry, I've noticed from my experience in working with the market, a lot of times number 4 is skipped, and they'll start to looking at vulnerability management, look at getting an EDR. They'll skip to number 10. They'll skip to number 13. But they never really do number 4. You have any insight as to why this piece is sometimes not operationalized?
So I think it's a lot of has to do with familiarity. So like when we look at like malware defenses and networking and vulnerability management, that's stuff that we can grasp and understand a lot easier. When we start getting into like creating baselines and baseline
more mature tooling for those other ones.
It's a lot, yeah. And there's a lot more mature tooling. I cannot talk today, man. Like, anyways. So a secure configuration though, like what does that mean, and how much settings and time and effort is going to go into it? And it's a lot. Like there's a lot that goes into there. So again, like whenever I would take an approach, I'd probably be like, yeah, I'm going to skip that for now. But like, I probably need eventually to at least start that process, because that might be a 2-year process to get that straightened out.
Also a very common access point for the bad guys.
Yeah. So we especially when we start talking about like the availability of low bins, like living off the LAN tools and binaries, right? Like that's like, this is where this comes into play, because attackers are smart. They're not going to drop some known rat, right? That's going to get immediately picked up. They're going to install TeamViewer, right? They're going to find the ones that won't trigger most antivirus or EDR platforms. It just looks like routine applications that are used. Like, and so this helps makes it harder for them to pivot if they get access to a machine or what they can do. So the harder you can make it for attackers without making it harder for your users, the easier, the better it's going to be.
So there's definitely the security return on investment, but it was really the effort and time it can take without automation tools, right? If you didn't have the budget to invest into a third party, doing it manually was almost impossible, it sounds like.
Yeah, and like, look, I'm a huge fan of configuration tools, but like whenever we started looking at this 6-7 years ago, like we're nowhere near, especially with automation, we're nowhere near in the space. Like we were putting together PowerShell and command line scripts and running them through our RMM and like
unfortunately people still do, right, Roddy?
Yeah. And then telling the agent to report back to the RMM, and then that'll generate an alert that probably went into a queue somewhere that we never went to look at. Right? Like that was the reality. When we just be like, I'll just go rerun the script once a month and fix it. But like during those time frames,
from that point to point,
what's going on in that time frame? Where's the we're attempting to
Roddy, guess who else knows about all of those things you're just talking about? The bad guys, right?
Yeah.
They're all very familiar with everything you just mentioned.
Yeah. So like baseline drift, how do you account for it, and how do you keep on top of it? Yeah.
Degley brings up a really good point. And this is something that I've talked about too. You know, when a consumer, you know, even an MSP, someone who is in the tech world, when we buy that new software, right, there's a ton of new software popping up, a bunch of AI wrapper tools, very much that pop up, and they're incredibly usable.
Yep.
You assume they're built correctly. They're secure by design. You just kind of like, hey, it does the thing. I'm going to assume they've done the other things as well, right?
Yep.
And as a startup, I mean, unless you are a security vendor like Senteon, security may not be your first priority when you're just starting out. It could be just getting people in the door to prove the business model. So this impression of secure by design is tough to overcome because your clients already think that. And Windows is no help here, right? Even them, a multi-trillion-dollar or billion-dollar company, right?
That's where control number 4 is really critical.
And I said this, they're only by default, about 17% of their systems are secure by design at the setting level. So, you know, that's a huge thing that people have to overcome. Roddy, I don't know if you want to expand on Degley's thought there.
I mean, he's probably right? Like we, in the world of like not following a strict methodology, you're going to assume you have a tool somewhere that actually does, and there may be some overlap there.
Well, that is an element of complacency.
Yeah, and like it's commonplace.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
It's commonplace. I'm not maybe not to the detriment. Maybe it's not malicious in intent, but it's still an issue that we have to do education on.
That's right. Agree.
Absolutely.
Degley coming in strong today.
I know, man. Degley's spicy.
I love it. All right. Speaking of spice, let's look at the ingredients today and talk about some of these settings. You guys like that? I thought it was creative. I thought it was great. I entertained myself. All right, let's pull up this slide here. So kicking off, again, we are talking about browser hardening, specifically Chrome hardening today. As a reminder for the audience, there is about 78 different, I can't remember. We're doing Microsoft Edge. We're not doing Chrome anymore. I need to update that slide. We're doing Microsoft Edge hardening today, and there are about 120 different settings. If I had updated the title slide, this would be appropriate.
That's fine. We get it.
Chrome, Edge, what's the difference? They're both
Chromium based now.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But there are about 120 settings that you can secure in your Microsoft Edge browser. And in this series, we talk about 10 to 15 every week. So let's dive into the first setting here, which was going to tie into some of this AI talk we were just wrapping up. So ensure configuration speech recognition is set to disabled. Roddy, I want my computer to know when I'm signing in. What's the harm in my computer knowing my voice? I talk into my microphone every day.
We're doing it now.
We don't know what your web browser is collecting when you're using your microphone, right? So again, I go back to like on my iPhone, and I almost do this all the time, is I send a text message and I actually hit the microphone to record a voice memo to send in text, and then it starts recording what I'm saying. And I'm like, oh, I got to hit stop. And then I might accidentally send that message. So like the same fear in your browsers, like what is, especially with AI starting to be embedded in a lot of your browsers or your extensions, maybe they're in your browser, like what's it just up on voice, and it's
potentially listening when you don't want it to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's bad enough. Bad enough. We had the wiretapping for a lot of our major ISPs out there was just breached by Chinese nationals. Like I don't need more of that going out if it doesn't have to, because you don't want to hear what I have to say in the privacy of my own home. Like that would be enough to ruin me.
No one should be exposed to that. I think
nobody should be exposed to it. Is correct.
I don't think anyone wants their phone just to be always listening. And obviously,
Correct.
in the past we've always talked about, Alexa, how is she always hearing her name if she's not listening to everything else, right? So very much there's fear here of just, if it is collecting constant data, constant sound, who else is collecting that? Where is it going, right? So if we can limit that attack surface and delete this, at least eliminate the risk from the browser level, that's one extra thing we can do. Speaking of kind of the more sophisticated attacks, the escalation with AI and whatnot, spoof phone calling and, sounding like someone else. Is this a trend you're seeing or anything you can talk towards?
Well, I mean, constantly.
So dangerous.
I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. We had, oh man, so many partners that call us about it, that they're getting spoofed calls. I mean, even from like political figures now with the election coming up, you'll get like spoofed Biden or spoofed Trump calls or whatever, like asking for donations. We're getting like
which, to be fair, in that scenario, that's pretty strong marketing, right? That is like a positive use case. But if you're that person who thinks it's actually them, like that's dangerous.
Yeah. Well, it's especially insidious, right? Like, because we know the election's coming up. We know in the U.S. and things are coming up. So, like, the other thing too is when I was at DEF CON in Vegas this year, there was a booth set up, and like they could collect a few minutes of you talking, and then they would create a whole video with your accurate voice and everything else. So it does not take a whole lot of clips, even for someone to mimic your voice in your
3 minutes
cadence style. It doesn't take very, very little to do so.
Good to know. I have about 100 hours of publicly accessible content on YouTube, so there may be a few Zach copies out there.
Hey, if they help you get more time in your day, then hey.
The other thing I want to call out on the slide format here, in the bottom left, we do outline the CIS control mapping. A lot of these CIS recommendations at the benchmark level do map back to a specific control. I have heard rumors from Matt Lee they are going to do that with all of the settings, because why only do some? But we are waiting for the next version on that. The other piece in the bottom right is going to be the level. So levels are typically 1 or 2 when we're talking about the browser hardening settings. Level 1 is the best practice that anyone should be doing and is likely not to cause disruption. It may change a little bit of user behavior, but CIS has determined it's so minor, it's worth doing anyway. Level 2, on the other hand, may actually cause a little bit of disruption. I personally don't know why this one would be considered level 2, but maybe it impacts some application functionality and so forth that needs that speech. So, all right, perfect explanation here. Let's jump over to the next one. So, configure the list of names that will bypass the HSTS policy check. Anytime I see bypass in a setting name, I feel like that's bad. Why do we put layers in place if we allow certain things to skip said layer? So why does CIS recommend to not allow this to the recommendation of disabled?
So HSTS is, I'm gonna blow the acronym, but it's like HTTP security transport strict, I want to say. Like don't but the whole point of it is that you're enforcing any website that supports HTTPS to use it.
Yep.
So if you have a list, you can add a URL that says I don't want this website to use secure protocols, and to force it, and which would degrade the security of that connection. So an attacker could potentially add a domain or add a URL and force downgrade that the security of it, and then be able to sniff traffic out of it using like a burp suite or something like that.
And I mean, the way I like to relate this, again, I always try to do the real world metaphors as I've learned so many of my mentors and peers do as well. Honestly, is the reason I tried to get better at it. Anywho, I think of this as like, an exclusive party where everyone has to get checked on their way in to make sure they are who they say they are. But if we allow this, that VIP who looks like the right person, sounds like the right person, acts like the right person, they don't even get checked. Why are we just trusting our impression that they are who they are instead of checking everyone, which is what this is saying to enforce.
Every time I walk into a school, I got to pass through the weapons detection systems. Every single time they do, like, that is a part of the security policy, because like I wouldn't think I would ever be a threat, but like, you don't want to start having the custom of saying, well, we'll allow it, because like, I might be a trusted individual. You can't be complacent, and you can't give an out. You can't give an out for that security policy.
You're not a threat until you are.
Yeah.
I think that's another really important note to bring up. We always talk about cybersecurity. We're literally talking about software settings. Like, that's what we do in this weekly show. But let's talk about physical security very briefly. And I will kind of tie this back here. A lot of the settings we talk about configuring, you know, on the OS, machine and activity timeout, having account log on, various things like this. All of this does relate back to physical security to some extent. But Roddy, with your experience between cyber and physical, does an MSP cover both aspects? Does it depend? Where does physical relate to the entire security posture?
So, all right, so it's physical 100%, because the 3 types of controls you can put in place are technical, administrative, and physical. So anybody who's like, I have my CISSP, like, they drill that into you. Like, physical security is paramount, because if I can get access to a system and I can touch it, I can potentially manipulate it. So if I can touch a network switch and I can get access to the console port, potentially I can make some configuration changes. Same thing with a server.
Plug a USB in.
Anything. Yeah, I could plug a USB in. I mean, there's tons of things you can do when physical security is low, which is why we put things in data centers and colos and everything else, because you should probably have a lot of physical controls. So we don't usually see that sometimes. I mean, I've walked into offices where like the server that holds all the accounting records is on a computer that's sitting on top of the fridge in the break room. You know, like, not a whole lot of physical security there. There's potential for access, and you know, physical security, I always say, like, you can put as much technical control as you want in place, but if you don't put enough in physical security, you're mitigating a lot of those technical controls.
Quick story from this morning. I was, you know, I've been kind of watching the hurricane information. There's plenty of that to see. And they showed someone from, you know, an official office with multiple screens in the background. One of the screens had like 4 sticky notes on the bottom. Like, I hope there's not a password on there. You never know.
Never seen that before.
Yeah, and when I worked for a CPA firm, same thing. Like, I had sticky notes on sticky notes everywhere. And when I was doing a security walkthrough, let's call it, basically like a pen test light at a law firm. And I walked up to a computer that was in a conference room, and I flipped over the keyboard, and underneath the keyboard was a sticky note that had the password to log into it. Once you logged in, you got access to all their law records, all their cases, everything, IP, intellectual property for partners and everything. Like that's a problem.
That's a quick lift for the wrong guy.
Yeah,
take all of it before anyone knows it happened.
And I guess just wrapping up this little segment, I guess tangent, right? Because this is something that interests me since I watched Tara Wheeler and her husband talk about this at MSP GeekCon. I thought it was a great presentation. And, you know, as an MSP, always really focused on the cybersecurity side. Would you say it's the responsibility of the MSP to bring up this topic, or don't bring it up until it's asked?
100%. Like, you have to be on top.
Do you think they are today? I don't actually know. I have no idea. This is outside of my scope.
Right,
do they bring this up today, or should they?
Well, that's where the debate comes. And we had a saying at MSP, like, where on the budget do we want to be? Do we want to be considered the same spot where they put the CPAs and they put their lawyers, they put all their other professional services and consultants, or do you want to be line item to where they put like janitorial services because we're the computer janitors, right? And like, the difference between that is how well you work to strengthen their business use cases, and how you align to their business use cases, and how you talk to them about risk. And risk, to me, is that's where you differentiate yourself between a traditional, like I used to go, like, hey, we used to be computer janitors, now we're consultants. Like, that's what pivoted us into that separate column, is because we were talking about the ways things could affect the business, and not just showing up and saying we're installing software.
Yep. And we got both our cats interrupting today's episode. So brought to you by both of us.
They're talking to one another.
Yeah, they can see each other through the camera. All right. Now, thanks for the segment there on the physical security piece. I don't think that's talked about nearly enough. But back to the settings here. So the next one, configure the list of types that are disabled from synchronization is set to enabled. So, or excluded from synchronization is set to enabled. So this is saying to make sure this is actually, oh man, my cat is walking on my keyboard. Roddy, take it away. I need to fix my screen.
So configuration of list types. So what you're doing is you're talking about what types of data can be synced between browser sessions or different browsers. So like if you have Edge on your work computer and Edge on your home computer, like what syncs between the two? And that could be form data, passwords, bookmarks, favorites, etc., etc. So might not be too much of a concern if you're syncing like favorites between the two, because you want to have your, your
Sure.
links to your favorites. But like if you're syncing passwords, or you're syncing form data, like that might have personal information.
Well, even riskier than that, Roddy. I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of people don't know what they're syncing.
Yeah.
So it's fine for you to say don't sync the passwords, but if I'm syncing and I don't know what I'm doing, I'm probably pushing stuff over that I don't even know what's happening.
And then you gotta ask yourself, where is that password being stored between those? Because I'm not connecting my two browsers together. It's going to probably a server, maybe saved in my Gmail settings or my Microsoft account settings. And if that account gets breached, like then you have access to all that. And that happened with a company who was syncing Google Auth tokens in there. And when it syncs between devices, it uses your Google account as a holder to sync all your devices together. Google account got breached. They got access to all of their one-time password tokens, which means they could generate MFA codes and bypass MFA. And it's that type of real quick, like, and that's the type of thing that we have to think about. Is like, what? Not only are we syncing between browsers for like usability, which is great, we want to make sure the user experience is great, but where is that data being stored? How does it pass between the two devices?
And the other piece here too about these settings, it is just kind of creating that security culture. It is controlling your employee, your end client behavior, because this is in a scenario, an SMB who has a MSP, you should be trusting that MSP to set up the devices, to set up the browsers and whatnot. If this setting is available, it creates opportunity for not someone malicious. I mean, yes, someone malicious to use it, but not even someone just malicious, but the employee themselves, the end client themselves, from doing something by accident. So without this hardened,
and with that
the
basic
MSP loses
education,
power.
Zach, if you explain that as eloquently as Zach just did, no one's going to complain. With Roddy's story and Zach's description.
So every single client prospect needs to watch 58 hours of CIS content, and then the world is going to be a better place.
100%.
100%.
And then another thing too, and while we're touching on like syncing types, like putting passwords in browsers, right? Like I'm not a huge fan of that.
No, we've talked about that a lot.
Because some of the pen testing we used to do, we would just dump all the passwords out of name a browser. We just dump all of them out of it and get access to them. So don't do that.
Saved as plain text, or is that bad? No.
Oh yeah, a notepad document on your desktop that says passwords do not open, because you've given a warning not to open the file. So like that's enough warning for the attacker not to use it.
It's not very.
Don't go bashing message logon text, Roddy. That is upheld in court of law, which I know you've experienced. That you say that hacker had to click OK to my disclaimer.
And that's where you get them.
Roddy, what you're
that's
talking
where
about
you get
is not
them.
a long walk away from your password on a sticky note right on the front of your screen. It's not a very far walk from that, unfortunately.
So secure storage of passwords. I could give you at least 4 cases where an email compromise was worse because they got access to client passwords through an Excel document. So we could spend a whole hour talking about password tips
next time. Round 4.
Round 4. Definitely get you a green jacket then. All right, let's go to the next slide here. It's too much fun having you on. Configure the share experience is set to enabled, which means don't allow using the share experience. Again, these GPOs, please look to CIS as that guidance, because they are phrased in a way where you probably think the answer would have been disabled. At least I would have. But in this case, it is enabled, which means don't allow.
Yes, correct.
Did I lose internet?
Are you good?
Oh, I lost signal. My bad. Anyway,
No.
I was just saying, make sure to read the GPO closely, because this sounds like the recommendation should be disabled, but in fact it is enabled, saying don't allow.
So
don't
by
read
default,
the GPO, read the benchmark, and
by default, share experience allows it. So if you leave it to disabled, it stays to the default, which is allow shared experience, because it's a usability feature turned on by default. You have to enable it, and then you have a couple of settings, and one of the settings is don't allow. So you have to enable, don't allow, because by default, it's allowed. And if you set to disabled, you're actually allowing it because that's the default. Not confusing at all.
Not confusing at all. I mean, and again, relating this to the real world, it's like, if you have something that you only want for yourself, a family trip and whatnot, and then you have it available to anyone to just add their itinerary to your itinerary, you now have a very large family vacation with a bunch of strangers because everyone's going to experience the same thing. So why are we letting anyone in?
Yeah. And from a corporate standpoint, right? Like if I have shared experience allows you to say like, oh, here's a cool link. I'm going to put it on my phone so I can read it later. Right. So that's part of sharing. Or like, I'm going to send this to my Xbox. So like, why should my corporation allow my work laptop to send stuff to my Xbox or to my mobile phone? Or and that can be anything.
Who knows
what
like they're saying? Who knows what's being sent?
And you're moving potentially sensitive information from a controlled environment to an uncontrolled environment, and that's a can.
If that enterprise is trying to container where their data is and knows where their data is, you utilizing this to put it somewhere convenient defeats the whole purpose of the entire investment to all of those containers they were working towards.
If you're an MSP and you're not in full control, it's not a good situation.
Correct.
Period.
Correct.
All right. Next one here, a little bit longer one if I remember right. So configure whether from form data from HTTP headers will be sent when entering or exiting Internet Explorer mode is set to enabled. Do not send from data or headers. One note, there is a setting we'll get to, I think we already did, or we will another day, to disable Internet Explorer entirely. But that, again, doesn't mean you don't need to do this setting because each settings are very much related. So please don't just do the 5 that you know. Look towards the CIS guidance and do the 120, or at least consider doing as many as you can. Roddy, Internet Explorer, bad, of course, but specifically these header data and form data, what does this mean?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about Internet Explorer. It got me through many a rough days in 2001. But 2001.
But
so it follows the same concept I just talked about. Like, so we know Internet Explorer's not supported anymore. It's got vulnerabilities. It's not as secure as Edge, just in the way it's built. So when you're transferring data between insecure and secure, that can become problematic. So we don't want to. We want to prevent that as much as possible. I mean, there's still maybe some use cases to still use Internet Explorer just for
government
compatibility. Yeah, government, doctors' offices who still love faxes. Things like that.
There's legacy applications.
There's legacy applications
everywhere,
that you can't upgrade.
Yep.
And look, in controlled environments, isolated environments where maybe you don't have internet access on the machine, you can be something. But generally speaking,
let's not kid ourselves. It exists out there.
Yeah, there's some banks out there I could tell you that still use Internet Explorer. So
you kind of hint at one thing. There are use cases, an application that needs access, whatever. Talk about how you view complementary controls. Do you have a best practice you can share on documenting? Is it you have to segment it completely off? Depends. Anything you can share on managing exceptions like this?
So you got to look at the risk that you're going to have not implementing the control, and then say, how do we negate this? So it could be, I've done this before where I said, oh, we got to run this application. Cool. I'm going to put it in a virtual server that we just use just for remote desktop, and you remote in, and that thing's severely locked down. And the only thing it can do is access that one application, or you publish it as like a remote web app or something, whatever you want to do.
Defense in depth, right, Roddy?
Yeah, defense in depth, and you severely lock it down. So like when we were doing like PCI compliance and you had to scope stuff out, we moved all the credit card stuff to its own VLAN. They couldn't touch anything else, and you had to RDP into a server to do some of the work, because trying to make sense of that compliance and trying to do that across the board would have severely impacted the business and just poor user experience off the bat.
Yeah.
So we can put some compensating controls, and it may be a little bit more expensive than just turning a setting on. But again, if you have to have it, you have to have it, and you can't just tell a business don't do it if it's going to severely impact their bottom line. Yeah. So you have to make some leeways.
Yeah. There might be a plan to deprecate IE, but it might be a couple years out. Yeah. In the meantime, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, we had an application we used at our CPA firm that used Microsoft Java, which hadn't been built on since like
Jeez.
1995 or 96. And like we had this download stashed away on the server, and it was like, do not ever delete this because you cannot find this download anymore. It was to run one specific app for the state sales tax like center or something like,
and which is important, right? It was important for them.
So it was on a laptop. We had a laptop, and that's you want to do this on this work. It's one laptop, and when you plugged it in, it VLAN'd off into its own network, and then like, hey, it's not touching our main network at all.
Nice. And you've dealt with the compliance and auditing side, if I remember your background correctly. How do they view exceptions? If it's documented, no ding, or how does? Yep.
It's documented, it's made note of, and you have to make sure that the compensating control at least meets the requirements.
We're aware of the risk, and we've addressed it.
Yeah, you could totally accept the risk, but like if the auditor comes in and says, on the financial side, we say that's too much of a risk against to protect your financial statements or protect your budget. Like no, like because again, the whole job of protecting the budget is to protect the business from going under and causing other issues. So yeah, like you could just say like, oh, we're cool with it, and the job of the auditor is to say like,
not cool.
I wouldn't do that. Like, A, you're not breaking the law, but B, that's a huge risk you're taking. Yeah.
The market is a fail.
All right, we got about 3 more settings. We're making great time. This next one here, ensure control use of continue running background apps after Microsoft Edge closes is set to disabled. I know Chrome uses my CPO, whether it's open or closed, right? I can never actually get rid of it, right? Can I?
Yeah, so two issues here. So with regards to security, and there's one piece of this that we normally don't talk about. So in security, you have 3 altars at which you worship as a security guy. Confidentiality, which we all know about. That's like, hey, data needs to stay private. That's privacy. That falls under the one we focus on the most. There's integrity, right? Things that shouldn't change, and we need to make sure we know when things change. And then the last one is availability. So making sure that system resources, systems, access to data, et cetera, are available. So making sure systems are running smooth, that there's no system resource hogging is actually falls under cybersecurity as an availability piece, right? The second part of this, and this goes back to the pen testing days, is people used to go, there's no way you can steal my access token in Office 365. I use incognito mode, and then I close out of my browser whenever I'm done with that session. You didn't steal my token. And it's like, yes, but if that process is still running in the background, then that session and that session cookie hasn't been deleted yet, and we stole it that way. And they're like, people would get floored at that. I'm like, yeah, you got to make sure that background apps and anything else that could tie up a potential browser executable, like edge.exe or chrome.exe or whatever, like that kills that process, so that anything tied to that gets cleared. It sounds
like,
especially incognito mode.
That story, it sounds like you've explained to someone who maybe was non-technical and had never really thought about this or explained it. How did you make it click so easily? Did you do a demonstration or? Yeah,
we'd show it.
Well, that'll be impactful.
But this is actually explaining it to technical folks that didn't understand it. And we was like, hey, because like when we were doing it, we didn't.
I learned a little bit there, Roddy. Not gonna lie.
Very rarely did we get in front of end users to discuss it, because like it was very we needed the partner to then talk and translate that down. But yeah, I
didn't realize this was a demonstratable flaw, if you will.
Yeah, you can show show the session token still active on the system that you can still reuse. And until they close out that session or they kill that session in Office 365, that token can still be usable. So once I steal it, it's still usable until that refresh token dies in the background, like in Office 365.
And another level 1 setting here. This is something that CIS recommends everyone to do. Shouldn't be changing any flows, shouldn't be making any disruption. It's just best practice to be doing this. So, and there's a real world attack scenario that Roddy leveraged too.
Honestly, worse than I thought. I learned something there. Thank you, Roddy.
Yep.
I assumed this was more about resources personally, but clearly there's more to it than just that.
Yeah, resources, yes, right? Like I'm not gonna.
That's the obvious one. You went a different direction that I wasn't ready for. So
I'm thinking about malicious code in this.
Potentially too. Especially I think one of the ones that's coming up in one of the slides is like headless mode, and so
that one's in 2 slides.
We can tie those 2 together in a second.
Yeah, let's do this next slide and we'll get back to headless mode. So control communication with the experimentation and configuration service is set to enabled, which again is disabling this feature. This sounds like probably something that hasn't hit full production via Microsoft, something that's maybe beta-ish. Experimentation is what that's kind of leading towards. Is that fair? Is that what this is saying?
So experimentation is sending data to basically beta services, essentially
collecting feedback or session information.
And then configuration service is the same, except that's to send configuration like session information between browser sessions or something to that effect, if I recall that correctly.
So it's really going back towards what are we actually sending? It isn't even in their production yet. So where's this data in the beta service?
Whatever it can and just self-serving it all back to itself.
Yeah, I think it goes back a little bit to the idea of zero trust too. If it doesn't need to be communicating, it shouldn't be communicating.
It's not your responsibility to QA
we need to verify. We need to verify and then trust that it actually needs to be used. And if it doesn't need to be used, turn it off. Like there's no use for it.
Yep. All right. Now we'll get to the fun setting we've been waiting for. Control use of the headless mode is set to disabled. I feel like this is I guess a good metaphor I hear, like Elon Musk with some full self-driving, maybe some cars without a visible driver is not allowed, or is Waymo making that allowed now? I don't know.
Yeah. Good old headless, right? Like, so the I don't know if you know, but the origin.
How is that different than hairless, Roddy?
Hairless is what happens whenever you're done configuring CIS benchmarks and manually. Let me say manually. You're gonna have hairless mode.
Senteon can incorporate a manual process, and we'll call it the hairless mode of Senteon, and then you could just manually do GPO editor.
You don't want this. You want
Rogaine for ticks is what it is. So like headless mode, the headless comes from the back when we had physical servers, back before there were virtual machines and everything. Like you usually just stack boxes on top of boxes next to one another, and they didn't have any monitor hooked up to it, so there's no visual output of what the servers or workstations or whatever were doing. So you had headless servers. Yep. So we take that back down to Edge, which is you can run background commands or background sessions in Edge without it being visual to the end user. So you could run, it's mostly used for like automation purposes. So like maybe I have Puppet or I have my ORMM and I need it to launch an Edge session, not launch it in the user context, not present the screen to the user so the user doesn't see it. Maybe I need to go download, use it to download Adobe Reader and part of my automation and then run it to update it or whatever. So you would use like Edge headless mode. But obviously we know that if we can do it, then an attacker can do it. And if a user's not aware, like, hey, did Edge pop up on your screen? No, then they're completely clueless that an attacker might be using
See something,
Edge.
say something doesn't exist because
the attacker's not going to go after Adobe Reader. It's going to go after something different.
Yeah, so they're going to use it. They're going to use it for their nefarious purposes, maybe pulling down malicious code or contacting a C2 server or something like that. So you want to again limit what they can do.
Yep. I mean, that's the big theme of this entire webinar series, right? It's limiting what bad guys can do, which in turn limits what good employees can do to make sure they stay on the right path and that they're not stepping out of their lane, doing something accidentally malicious, and ultimately keeping control of the security operations within the MSP, right? That's the end goal. If you have all of your EDR, if you have your entire stack, but the end user can still do whatever they want,
they will hurt you.
Yeah. How valuable is all of the security tools you have? So, all right,
and like we can take into account like malicious. There's malicious insiders, and then there's non-malicious insider threats. Non-malicious insider threats are your staff that like don't know they're doing something wrong.
Yeah,
they're not doing it bad intent, but it still hurts your business in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
poor.
That's the
poor
that's the bigger population. I mean, the other population, is more rare, but also exists.
Look, I'm probably a non-malicious insider threat to SureWeb. Like I'm not gonna beat around the bush. Like if I download a file and put it on a USB drive, like that is a threat, even though it might be a small one. It's still a threat because it might be intellectual property on that's going on now. I'm not going to use it for any malicious purposes, but like still a threat to the business.
I mean that should be the end goal of any business owner, any MSP is just saying, hey, I'm going to make the non-malicious insider threats as least non-malicious as possible. Give them the least opportunity to be that.
Roddy, let me ask you this. So let's say you're poking around your network internally and you grab some sensitive information just to see if you can, do you make someone aware that that's probably not a good idea? What's
me
your
personally?
response?
Me personally, yeah. Like
Yeah,
if I get access to payroll data,
Yeah.
like I'm gonna report it. I'm gonna be like, hey, you guys should probably lock this down if you don't want it to be out there. But yeah, every business should have a responsible like reporting mechanism. Like it should be spelled out in policy. Yeah, it should be spelled out in policy of like, if you see something, here's the process to report. Here's who you report to. And it could be a position or it could be a person or whatever, but like you need to report it to your supervisor or you need to report it to HR or whatever. There has to be a process for it.
Yeah. Cool.
So again, it starts with education. And if you don't have a policy in place, you can't educate around it. And if they're not educated, they don't know, they're end users, then you can't claim they should have known better, right?
I mean, someone gets into your payroll system, Rod, and they see how much money you're making. It's not going to be good for morale for anybody.
Well, I think it would be good for my morale. I'm just like, hey.
All right. We got 2 more settings. We got about 3 minutes left. We're doing just fine on time. So control use of serial API is set to enabled, which again, this means do not allow this to be leveraged. And this is actually a level 2. So in this scenario, I imagine there might be some websites or some type of application that is going to require this to be operational. Yep. But overall, this will have a larger return on security investment than allowing it to happen. So, Roddy, explain what the serial API is and why we don't want anyone to have it.
Serial API allows, in this instance, the Edge browser to communicate with devices attached to the serial bus on a machine. So that could be, if I'm assuming correctly, it's not just what we traditionally call serial devices, but I think potentially USB devices too. But like, don't quote me on that one.
That'd be worse.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, like, this would be a problem in some medical offices because I've run across this before because they might have a
peripheral they need
that's normally is a glucose testing machine that like uploads the patient's information from the testing machine into their medical records, which are electronic, which is done via website. So you probably would need it to pull that medical data into from a serial. So like you could potentially run into a problem in situations, but like most businesses, I can't remember the last time I ran across an actual like old school serial device, but they still do exist. And I can tell you, foot pedals for lawyers they use for dictation software. So you step down the foot pedal and it starts the dictation software. Like some of those are parallel and serial and USB ones. And
not familiar with those. That's cool.
Oh man, the lawyers love them for dictating because they can just push down the foot pedal, talk, and it dictates the brief or whatever they're doing.
Awesome.
Yeah, like a sewing machine foot pedal, basically.
Yeah.
Some of these settings may disrupt those processes.
I just don't have people.
Your lawyer's foot pedal,
I can do that, but I don't have any people, so it's not going to be helpful.
All right, one more setting to go here. The last one is control where security restrictions on insecure origins apply is set to disabled. I don't like the phrasing of this setting at all because I can't even on the fly really understand it. So control where is disabled. Don't we want to control these things? Anyway, yes. Roddy, help us understand this a little bit better.
So you don't want someone to be able to configure non-secure locations. So you set this to
there we go.
So you don't want any, like, you want to be able to control, you don't want end users changing non-trusted sources and what security restrictions apply to them, essentially. So it's a little weird in the wording, but that's what it's
probably.
Now, I don't know what the application, I don't know the application.
Remote work? Does that
another level 2 setting, right? So there is an application that probably exists, but again, overall, these are the best practice recommendations. Do what you can, don't force what you can't.
Would that enable me to make my home network a safe workplace as an extension as a remote worker?
I guess you could, like if you had if you had insecure, like you'd set like a secure subnet or secure so I'm thinking like you can set a secure subnet in some of the settings. So that potentially be what it's for.
Yeah. So that would not be advised.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's pull up this last MITRE ATT&CK slide. And Roddy, we are right at the hour. As much as I thought we had plenty of time, we always get into the good stories and side topics. So just kind of while we show this slide, just toss some closing thoughts. What do you want to leave the audience with? Again, these settings all map back to the MITRE ATT&CK technique. CIS does that for us, and I simply present them in these slides. But Roddy, you talked a lot about the attacker side, a lot about the what MSP needs to focus on side, and just controlling where the data is and how the data is accessed. But to an MSP who's never done this, maybe considering it, maybe doesn't think it's their responsibility, what can you kind of share towards that with some closing thoughts?
It's never your responsibility until something bad happens, and then it's all your responsibility. So that's
it's an all or nothing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when something bad happens, the question then is going to get raised to you that, what were you doing? We thought you guys were handling this, and if you've never had a communication or you've never approached a client about improving their security posture through like a framework or a methodology, and you say like, hey, we want to do this in the next quarter, and then it's to be an iterative process for the next 2 years to get you to a good place, you have a miscommunication with your client. And then when something bad happens and you continue, the miscommunication becomes apparent that you didn't do your due diligence or your due care, whichever term you want to use in that situation. It compounds the problem. It's already bad. So, like I tell people, the worst time to have a conversation about backup and recovery is whenever you're attempting to recover a system and there's missing data. Like I had that conversation twice with a client before I was like, we need to talk about
better operationalize this.
Because
back to the basics.
Because again, like clients would be like, what do you mean you didn't have a spare server laying around? Like, no, of course I didn't have a spare $25,000 server sitting on the shift collecting dust. Like, that's not good for my business. So there's a lot of assumptions being made sometimes. Your MSA, you can say whatever you want it to say. Client's probably not reading the MSA, all right? Until something bad happens, and then they go, I thought you were doing this, So having that ongoing conversation, that ongoing roadmap, we're doing X, Y, and Z. Giving them recommendations, and even if they turn them down, but you talk to them about it, right?
Yeah.
Like it's
on them, but if you don't voice it, it's on you.
Yeah.
Correct.
And you mentioned something that I want to call out before we wrap up is, being aware of all these and like, okay, so for example, if you have a scanning tool, whatever configuration scanner you use, and all the things that are wrong, but you look at Control-4 and you look at all of those red marks, and you're like, that's going to take too long. When something does happen, you can't defend why you didn't do it because now you knew you were accepting risk. It wasn't documented. You can't go to that court and just say, I was too busy, but yes, I knew about all this, when some of those corrections could have eliminated that. Mm-hmm.
It's part of evidence. It's documented. That's when forensics come in. They're going to see all those red boxes. It's facts. It's evidence. Correct. It's forensic evidence at that point. So you're not going to hide it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Roddy, for hopping in for a third time on the webinar series with me and Rich. So let's get to always a blast too. All right, let's get to the top. Yeah, perfect. So next week we do have Tara Wheeler hopping in from Red Queen Dynamics. She actually has a platform that is assisting with the attestation to the CIS controls. So really excited for her to do a quick intro on that.
I'm excited.
That'll be a great one. Tara's great. Brad Powell, Chase Cunningham coming in as well in the following weeks as we slowly wrap up the Edge Hardening series. And as a reminder to everyone listening, you can check out the freemium version of Senteon or even get 100 free internal or external assessments if you do sign up at the app.senteon.co. And feel free to watch the replays on our